You ever have one of those people you've heard their name for years and you never met them, but you know you should? Well, that's my next podcast guest, Joey Brannon. We knew each other's names for years. And then finally, Rob Lane, a former guest on this podcast, Rob Lane introduced us, said you two have got to meet, and we have been friends since then. I hope you enjoy this podcast with my friend and founder of Axiom Strategic Consulting, Joey Brannon. All right, you heard a little bit about Joey in introduction, and welcome to this week's episode of I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members. Joey Brannon, a friend and a colleague for years. Joey, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your development of Axiom Strategic Consulting, and your work in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it. Like you said, we've known each other for years. Every time that topic comes out, I got to give a shout out to Rob Lane, who knew both of us and said, you guys ought to meet each other. And it didn't take long for us to get into a rhythm of getting together and talking about business and shop and that kind of stuff. So it's a pleasure to be here. About 20 years ago, I went out on my own, started my own business. It was an accounting and CPA firm. And that was an excuse to work with business owners. I did not relish taxes and accounting, absolutely loathed tax season. But I found that business owners were very trusting of the CPA relationship and would give me carte blanche to go in and dig around the business and come back with solutions to problems or recommendations. And eventually that got more and more built around a suite of strategic planning and execution rhythms and routines and tools that we've built for clients. So about 7 years after that, after jumping off the cliff and going into self-employment, we sold the tax and CPA firm to another provider so that we could just focus on the strategic planning, execution, and coaching. So that's what we've been doing for the last 13 years, 100%. And we got a team of advisors who go out into the world and work with business owners to, what we say, grow their businesses with purpose. Most businesses want growth of some form or fashion, but we really resonate with the business owners who have a bigger purpose behind that. It could be legacy for family. It could be legacy for the owner in terms of building something that's going to last. Second, third generation ownership is in our wheelhouse. But we also have businesses. We've got 3 businesses right now that are exiting. And so walking them through the strategic sale process or the private equity liquidation process to try to preserve the things that they've built and really care about, but at the same time maximize what is, for most business owners, the largest single asset on their personal balance sheet. And so there's a lot of us out there who own businesses who are maybe foregoing 401k or retirement plan contributions and sinking all of that money back into new hires or new trucks or new facilities. And we're building our own retirement base. And there comes a day when we all need to draw on that. And so we're very involved in that side of the business as well.
Boy, and it's all not glamorous. It is hard work and it's risk, but you've got an interesting niche at Axiom. You walk alongside your business owners, and it's more than strategic planning. It's actually the implementation, and you've got this discipline, this rhythm. Could you just share a little bit with the audience about your approach with your clients and really the tenure of the relationships and the depth?
Well, we talk about 20 years. It's kind of 20 years of falling on your face and figuring out what doesn't work, and then you try something else until it does. So we started off, just kind of wading through businesses and then said, well, we need a discipline of execution. There's a lot of people who will get on a plane, fly into your business, take over your conference room for a week, and then sit you down and tell you all the problems that you have and leave you with, a giant report or plan, and then try to call you next year and sell you on a renewal of that. And we wanted to be shoulder to shoulder with the business owners when it came to actually implementing some of the recommendations or building some of the strategies that we were seeing opportunities in. So we knew that we were going to have to stay involved. And initially, we started meeting with businesses quarterly. And I found that 90 days was just not enough. And so this is probably 15 years ago this year that I called a lot of those clients. I called all those clients back and said, I'm not going to change your price. We're still going to charge you the same amount, but I'm going to be there every month. And what that created was not just a monthly rhythm of working with the teams but a lot more touch points between those meetings, and you really became an advisor to the business. So the relationship that we have with businesses, we ask them to view us as a box on their org chart that is shoulder to shoulder with their senior leadership team. And then a separate box that's kind of got a dotted line to the CEO, which is the voice of reason and counsel and insight and all the things that the CEO is probably not hearing or not seeing because they're the CEO. And when you're the owner of the business, you can whisper, but you speak with a megaphone, regardless of how gently you try to put things, or if you're having a bad day, people all of a sudden assume the company's going bankrupt. And so having that voice from the outside looking in, that's also got these deep relationships with the leadership team members, is highly valued by the CEOs that we work with. And over time, there's a lot of business frameworks out there. There's EOS, there's scaling up, there's 4 disciplines of execution. There's a dozen or so that have been popularized over the last 15 to 20 years. And we believe in all of them. If you have no framework for your business, then any framework is going to help. Any operating system is going to help. But what we've found is that what works for, that was outlined in a book that sold 10 million copies, doesn't work for every business. It works for every business to an extent, but what businesses really need is an operating system that's built for their business, that takes into account that owner's temperament and their role in the business, the leadership team's capability, the age of the organization. If it's a new organization, it's going to look a lot different than one that's been around 20 or 30 years. So our role is to go in and build the operating system that becomes that business's operating system. And we've got some, base level things that are always present, but over time, it really becomes something that defines how that company is led. And at its core, what we say all the time is a company that executes 52 times a year is going to run circles around one that executes 4 times a year or 12 times a year. So we train our leadership teams that we work with to execute on a weekly rhythm, to hold each other accountable, build that culture of accountability. And then we will come in and facilitate that for them once a month so they can all just participate, not have to run those meetings. We'll run a little bit bigger quarterly meetings. We'll do a 1 or 2 day annual planning session. But it just gets into that rhythm, and small changes, small improvements that are consistently executed 50 something times a year lead to these dramatic improvements after 2 or 3 years. And so a lot of our clients, that it's not cheap, right? So they all want to know, like, how long do I have to pay this money? And you say, well, let's imagine you went out and you found a really good general manager and you said, hey, I want you to work your butt off for the next year and get us in a good spot. And then we'd like to reduce your compensation, right? And so growth creates its own problems. And the companies that keep us around, a lot of them, I think our average tenure right now, the last time we measured it was 41 months. But that just keeps going up because we've got clients that have been with us for 10 or 11 years. And the problems that we're helping them face and the plans that we're helping them build are unrecognizable from 10 years ago because growth creates its own issues.
Well, and it's a testament, that duration is a testament to you and your leadership and your vision for the organization. Now, Joey, you all consult primarily with for-profits, but you do nonprofit work as well. So I don't want to take that off the table. And you have served in the nonprofit space on a number of boards, which you have shared with me. Would you just take a step back and compare and contrast the difference between the two as you see it?
Well, one of the things one of the expectations we have for every advisor that works at Axiom is that they also take that skill set that they're able to apply so effectively in the for-profit world, and they do that for a nonprofit as well. And that's primarily pro bono. And that's a big ask for these advisors because their compensation is based on their client book of business and the amount of revenue that it generates. But we really believe that the same principles that help for-profit organizations succeed help nonprofit organizations succeed. You've got to plan, you've got to execute, you've got to build a culture of accountability. You have to be clear about expectations and measure outcomes against those expectations so that people have a sense of whether they're performing well or they're not performing well. So in that sense, there is no difference. But as you well know, dealing with 100% owner or 2 50-50 partners or a small ownership group of 3 people is vastly different than operating in the nonprofit space where statutorily there are no owners, right? Nobody owns a nonprofit. That's the reason it's set up that way. And so you've got board dynamics and CEO dynamics, and the chair of the board makes a huge difference. So it is a space that we like to offer our skill set to, but if they're struggling, you're the first name we hand across the table. Like, you got to go talk to the guy who can help you navigate this nuance that is just not present in the for-profit space. And in my work, and when, like a lot of professionals, as a CPA aspiring to partnership, you join a firm, and that's the first thing they tell you to do. Go out and join a nonprofit board. And being the overachiever, I think there was one point where I was on 6 nonprofit boards at one time. And I have a CEO council of advisors, so kind of like my board members, and we all help each other and coach each other up. And when they found that out, they were like, all right, this has to stop. And they made me whittle it down to 2. There was one large organization that I was the chairman of the board for, and there was another smaller organization where my heart was just firmly planted in their mission. And I said, I really don't want to give up both of these. And they said, okay, we'll allow you to have 2, but they're trying to get me down to 1. And I learned a lot. I mean, that was so formative in my education from business operations, organizational operations, from leadership, from the idea that there's a positional leadership that comes from a place on an org chart or a seat on a board of directors, but that pales in comparison to the power of influential leadership. So your ability to serve the people that you're working alongside and serve the people that you're leading. And it was, I can't overstate the role that in the first 10 years of my career of being involved in nonprofit boards provided for that reason, but also because, you're kind of punching above your weight in a lot of ways. Particularly if you have a skill set that's in demand. So you talk to nonprofit board members, and, if you're a CPA, what's the first officer position you're ever offered? Right? Treasurer, right? Oh, you're a CPA. You could be a great treasurer. And you know nothing about treasury management. You know nothing about the treasury, fiduciary role on a board. But you're a CPA, so you must know what you're talking about, right? And, it could be the banker in the room that gets that call. If you have any like rainmaking capability whatsoever, right? Well, you're going to be the fundraising chair. If you have, the older nonprofit board member that's got the thick Rolodex and has been in the community for 20 or 30 years, well, you're the board development committee chair, so there's all these kind of spots that seem to automatically get filled. But when you're sitting there alongside these folks, and you're asking good questions and you're contributing to the discussion around the table, and you're not scared to be a dissenting vote. When you're in a leadership position, you're not scared of the dissent. You encourage it. You just learn a tremendous amount about what it takes to lead inside that boardroom, but also the leadership principles that you're going to take home, that you're going to take back to your business, that you're going to take to your church, that you're going to take to your neighborhood association. It was incredibly formative for me.
Well, you articulated very well the benefits of joining a nonprofit board. I'm curious, as the people come to you that your advisors and consultants that you said you encourage them to join a board, how do you act? How do you recommend new board members, young board members behave? How should they approach their board work and attending board meetings? Because they're very intimidated, but all of a sudden they got a seat at the table. You mentioned dissent a second ago. Just what advice and counsel would you give them?
Well, I think we have the same approach when it comes to like industry associations or chambers that they might want to be involved with. And my single biggest requirement is that you have to be involved in a committee, because it's in the committees that they're less formal, they're less intimidating for a new board member. Instead of sitting at a table with 16, 20 people, you're sitting at a table with 4 or 5. Most of them have no idea what they're doing, which you don't either. So it's a safe place for you to learn. But that's where you get to understand what the organization does, what their real needs are, who the key executive team is, that leadership team. You get to know their personality. You get to know what they're struggling with. You get to know the CEO a little bit better if they're in those meetings. You get to know like what the CEO's blind spots are. And if you've served in a committee or several committees for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, like a lot of nonprofits, the smaller nonprofits, getting to the chair seat is just a matter of attrition, right? So if you stick around long enough, your name is going to be thrown in the hat and you're going to be the chair. And then if you've had that experience over the last several years of getting to know the people who actually make the organization run, the other, if there's 20 days in the month, there are 19 and a half of those days, you're not there, right? Maybe 19 and 3/4 of those days, you're not there. They're the ones that actually have to carry out the mission of the organization. So serving on committees and getting to know the people who make things happen is absolutely a requirement. But you also there's in a group dynamic, like a board setting, I oversimplify things. So I've said for a long time, like every business book could be boiled down to thirds, right? The first third is the reason the author wrote the book. The second third was when they decided it needed to be a book, so they had to create more. And the third is when they turn it into the publisher, and the publisher is like, this isn't enough, right? And I think boards are similar. Like you could take the board composition, and you could say a third of the people, they really believe in the mission of the board. They eat, sleep, breathe, bleed that mission. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their capability. They are just staunch advocates of the organization, and they'll do anything you ask of them. And that's extremely valuable. And one of the boards that I sat on, that I became the chair of, we had a gentleman who'd been on that board for 20 or 30 years, and he was the culture banner carrier. He always reminded us of who the formative people were in the organization 20 years ago, how those relationships developed, why we were doing business or had these partnerships with other organizations, and how that started. And he was the person that was there at every fundraiser. He was there at every ribbon cutting, every promotion, every retirement party. You could count on Bill to be there. And then there's a second third, and these are the people who are gifted in administration, board management, roles and responsibilities, and they come in, and if they're not, if they don't feel like their talents are being used in the first 2 or 3 years, they'll go somewhere else. And so you've got to recognize those highly accomplished people who really want to give their time to something they believe in, and those folks are imperative. And then you've got the third, which is like what I was probably my first 5 years of board membership, which is don't know what I'm doing, don't know how to prepare, trying to figure out what the organization actually does. And I think this is underappreciated by CEOs and longstanding board members and staff members, is that you have somebody who joins your board for the first time, and you've got an organization that has maybe a relatively small budget, $5, $6, $7 million, but that's spread out over 2 or 3 locations or 2 or 3 programs. And within each of those programs, there are a dozen sub-programs. There's a whole volunteer corps you never meet. And you just have no idea what we actually do. And it's not talked about in board meetings. You might have, a mission moment at the beginning of a board meeting where a program director or a volunteer comes in and talks about this great thing that just happened and how we're making a difference in the community. And it's up to those, that last third, that uninitiated board crew, to assemble over the course of 2-3 years enough of those mission moments and little glimpses into what's going on to get a picture of what the organization does. So I think, one of the best things an organization can do is have a new board member orientation that's very well thought out, maybe last 3 or 4 months, where these people get invited to everything, and they're not going to be able to make everything, but they should have one opportunity a week to see what the organization does, to interact with the staff that's getting the work done, to see the difference that's being made in the community, to sit in on interviews that are happening for new team members. I mean, that kind of stuff is invaluable because a lot of those uninitiated people are highly talented. They do believe in the mission. They want to contribute, but they're smart enough to know what they don't know, and they keep their mouth shut for longer than they should.
Well, you really summed up board membership and the approach. I appreciate that very much. Now, let's say one of your business owners comes to you, one of your clients, and they're debating, they're grappling with joining a board. What advice and counsel on what type of board, what they should look at, how they should approach it?
The first thing I would say is, do you have the margin to do this? Because you're not doing any board any favor if you're overworked and you're going to miss board meetings, you're going to miss committee meetings. You're not going to have time to engage in after hours things, whether those are fundraisers or community events, where your presence is very important. You know, the CEO or the VP of that nonprofit very much appreciates having board members present when the organization is doing its work, because we like affirmation. We like to be told we're doing a good job. But we have agendas. We have things that are very important to us. And to be able to get the ear or the eye of a board member is incredibly valuable to those folks. So if you're not going to be available for that, then rethink it. What I would say is, you're asking me this question because it's obviously important to you. You feel like you should do it, and I want you to do it well. So how do we create the margin, and have you had an honest conversation with the person who's recruiting you about what the ideal time commitment needs to be on a weekly basis? Don't talk monthly or quarterly, because that's the soft sell when they're recruiting is, well, we only meet 7 times a year. It's not a heavy lift. And it's like, well, that's not what effective board membership looks like. So do you have the margin? And then I would say, push back a little bit on the person who's recruiting you and just say, what do you see in me? What are the skill sets? You obviously approached me for a reason. What are the reasons that you approached me? Not because I'm going to disagree with you, but if you see a strength in me that you need to leverage in the organization, I need to know what that is so I can lean into that perceived strength, because I may not see it. You know, you might say, somebody might get recruited and they say, look, we're going to have a major board transition in the next 10 years. And you have navigated a major transition in handing over operations from you to a new CEO. And we could really use that kind of knowledge and wisdom as we go through that next transition. Okay, great. I can definitely help with that. How? And then, maybe you schedule another meeting, or maybe you just jump into it. Well, when you think about starting this transition? Because it took us 3 years to find the right person, or 3 years, maybe 6 months to find the person, and 3 years to know that they're ready to take over. Somebody else might say, well, you know everybody in this community, and we're going to need funders, we're going to need board members, so we would love for you to introduce us to those people. And that person might say, well, honestly, I believe in your organization. I'm happy to do that. I can do that regardless of whether I'm on the board. So what else? I still want to be on your board, but don't let that pigeonhole be the one that I get pushed into. What else do you need me to do? And just be transparent about what's the highest and best use I can serve in as your new board member, and be clear on expectations up front.
And I like your strategic approach, because it does have to benefit the board member as well, and then not be pigeonholed. Like you said, every CPA is pigeonholed to be a treasurer, and you may do it as your inaugural board tenure. But I've talked to a number of CPAs that said, anything but treasurer. I've done that too many times, because they want to test other skills. They want to learn and grow in other ways. So let's continue that discussion. The business owner comes to you. How do they select the nonprofit for which they should sit on a board?
That's a really good question, because there's more nonprofits that need your help than you'll ever be able to serve on. And so I think it's worth just think, like, the size of nonprofit makes a big, big difference. A larger nonprofit that's got a few $1 million worth of budget, and they have the money to hire professional team members, and are all going to depend on volunteers for a large segment of what they do. But there's a big difference between the group that, when you sit in a board meeting, you're seeing like 70 to 60% of the total compensation spend is in the room, right? That's your CEO, that's the assistant to the CEO who's taking minutes or whatever. And contrast that, where the CEO is in the board meeting and maybe another staff member is in the board meeting, but there's a whole cadre of other people who are out there who can leg out the work. And I think of boards as like there's kind of the operating boards where the board members are doing a lot of the work. Like they're setting up the chairs, they are running copies, they are putting together gift baskets or whatever. And then you have the advisory boards where there's a team of people who takes care of all that stuff. What we need you to do is hold us accountable to the plans that we've built, participate in building segments of those plans, and hold us accountable for execution, and then help us navigate all the roadblocks and things that come up along the way. And then you have fiduciary boards, which are a whole separate animal where you could be personally liable if you don't keep the organization's financial interests primary. So understanding like what is the kind of board that you want to get involved in. And it could be, for me, for a time, it was one of each, and that provided a really good outlet for me. But for others, especially if time margin is one of your things, there's a minimum amount of margin that you've got to set aside. But if you want to sit on an operating board because it's something, I've had this happen with business owners where a child has cancer or some other illness, and there's a group that really was formative in reaching out to them and helping them through that time. And they're like, I believe in this group. I got to be a part of it. Well, if that's an operating board where you're going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting and you're going to be volunteering to run concession stands at the Bucks game or at the Pirates game, then make sure you got the time to do that. But if you're going to sit on an advisory board, make sure that you're not filling a space that's already filled. So if they've got a pretty robust board, maybe you ask how you can support them. Maybe you ask if there's any younger board members that need mentoring. Maybe you ask if there's any staff members that could benefit from your particular area of expertise. But go find a board with a gaping hole in it I think there's a legal voice on a lot of boards. There's a financial voice on a lot of boards. There's kind of an organizational development / people voice on a lot of boards. There's a visionary voice on a lot of boards. And so find like, what's the organization that has the biggest hole in one of those key foundational areas? And if you could fill that hole, then jump in and make sure you've got the time to make it work.
I think that's great advice, and it's well thought out and very strategic, very disciplined, which is exactly what Joey Brannon and Axiom are about. Joey, well, how can the audience find out a little bit about Axiom Strategic Consulting and about you and learn more information? And please weave into your response, your podcast.
Yeah, so axiomstrategic.com is the business website. We have a sister company called Axis Outsourced Accounting, so axisoutsourced.com, and that's for businesses who maybe aren't there yet in terms of strategic planning and execution. They just have to get their financial house in order and get good data coming in. So there's an opportunity to learn more about that. And yes, we do a podcast, and you've been on that podcast. And so you can find that at the website as well. It's called Grow with Purpose. It was recently rebranded. For a long time, it's called the Axiom Podcast. And everybody thought, well, it's 20 years in, maybe it's time for a refresh. So Grow with Purpose is where you can find the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever people find podcasts these days. But we interview business owners and experts, subject matter experts. Our audience is business owners. That's who we have in mind when we're doing these episodes, to try to get them, one, encouraged, a little bit inspired, but also with some kind of brass tacks, fundamental knowledge points that are going to help them today. And one of the things that my team has done an extraordinary job well, this is one of those things that we talked before we started recording. There's whole aspects of the business now that is my great pleasure to know nothing about. And so the team, Carrie in particular on our team, she will go through an episode and put together a 3 to 4 page leadership guide that can be printed out from the show notes. People can subscribe to it so it comes in their inbox. And it gives you this great way, if you heard something in the podcast that you're like, oh, I think we want to do that. This gives you opportunities for self-study to go through it and apply it personally. It gives you an opportunity to do like a brown bag lunch and learn where your whole team can go through it. And it also gives you some one-on-one coaching if you got a particular member of your team. So there's some great opportunities to work on leadership and business growth through those tools. And we're happy to give all this stuff away because it's not the ideas that are important, it's the execution of them.
Oh, very well stated, that last statement. That's why you've been so successful in your business. And it's been a pleasure watching you all grow over the years. And congratulations to you on those aspects of the business that you know nothing about. That's when you've made it as a business owner and a leader. Unfortunately, you can't rest on those laurels, but congratulations to you, Joey. Joey, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you around town.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.
Great interview with Joey. And now it's Recapping with Reed, where Reed shares with us his insights and his takeaways. Reed, your first takeaway.
My first takeaway was Joey splitting a board into thirds. He said generally you can split any board into thirds. The people who believe in the mission, absolutely. The people who want to use their talents, and if they are not being used, will find an organization in which will use their talents. And then those who are uninitiated in the organization and really just don't know what's going on. So he emphasized bringing along those people who are uninitiated, taking advantage of those strengths of the people who want to use their talents, and then supporting those who truly believe in the mission.
Yeah, very good. Number two.
How he advises his clients, if they were to ask him about joining a board, he would first ask, do you have the margin to do this? Which is probably the best question you can ask. Do you have the time to do this? Because we hear about it all the time. Board members or people who sit on boards and they don't have the time, they aren't engaged, and it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the individual. It doesn't help the organization.
Very good. And number three.
And I don't know, this might be Axiom's tagline, but I really liked it. He signed off with it. It's not the ideas that are important. It's the execution.
Yeah, that was well stated. They're all about execution. Thank you. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Recapping with Reed, his 3 takeaways from our interview with Joey Brannon. And you know what I say next? We will I-501 see you next week.